It's all right. Horace Greeley was the man who said, "Go west, young man."
Yes, he was born in Vermont.
I was on a plane to America, and the captain announced that his name was Horace Greeley III. And I thought, I'm the only person on this plane who's thinking, "Go west with Horace Greeley III."
I once rear-ended Daniel Boone's great-great-great-grandson.
Doesn't surprise me at all, knowing you.
He was very forgiving about it. There was no damage done to his car, so he said, let's just forget it.
Fair enough. Let's...
Okay, so I'm going to put the thing into YouTube.
I'm going to need glasses, aren't I, to be able to read the questions.
I hate Google
Chrome. Let me dig out the first question.
There you are.
All right, let's put that on the...
I will hit send. And also do it in Patreon as well. Boink. There we go, dog. I'm going to hang up the phone.
Okay.
And hopefully we will have our first victim soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye. And here we are, I think. So, hello, Nathan L, and hi to you too. I have a question from Steph CLO. And hello, John Breen. Signed in twice to chat. Whoa, double chat. Yeah, question from Steph CLO. I presume that's a reference to Scientology's Continental Liaison Organization, but I'm not totally sure. It's a very good question. It says, thank you for staying up late and being graciously available to us all. My pleasure, it's not that late. A quick question, lawsuits in general. Do you ever foresee a day where any staff, public or Sea Org member can hire a decent lawyer, flood RTC with lawsuits, RTC being the governing body of Scientology, the Religious Technology Center, and make a major dent in their war chest? Well, suing Scientology is no fun. I've tried it myself unsuccessfully. But the precedent is Lawrence Wollersheim. I worked on the Wollersheim case way back. It took Lawrence 20 years, but despite them protesting and marching up and down with placards and shouting, not one thin dime for Wollersheim, they ended up having to pay him $9.2 million. Now, I also, before that, and long, long ago, in 1988, I worked on a suit by a group that called themselves Freedom for All in Religion. And they'd gathered together a class of over 400 people ex-members. And they'd put their petition to the court 4 times and had it rejected on the grounds that it was not clear, on the one hand, why they were a class of people, why they were suing for the same thing, or why the people they were suing were a class of people. David Miscavige had, excuse me, David Miscavige had already slid away from the suit and forced them to pay some costs. And I sat with the lawyers, and one of them had already won quite a big case against an authoritarian cult group. And they said they'd been working on this for 2 years. And they were tremendously relieved that I'd arrived because they didn't really understand what the case was about. So I went away and thought about it. I was over in LA for a week or so, going over things, particularly with Hannah and Jerry Whitfield, who were working on the suit, as part of the 6-person steering committee for the suit. And I determined, the first thing was that I showed that all of the organizations, Religious Technology Center, and the hundreds of other organizations, the Church of Scientology, Religious Education College Incorporated, and the publications organizations in both the US, Bridge Publications, and in Denmark, they're all part of a monolithic corporation. And I was able to show that with the registrations for the corporations themselves, and an affidavit that said that David Miscavige was keeping undated signed resignations for all corporate positions in his safe, which de facto meant that he had complete control over all of the corporations. So the first thing is to make a class of the Scientology organizations, and that can be done. My work was used by Lawrence Wollersheim, and by because his case was against the Church of Scientology of California, and we had to show that that had dwindled. I think it had $123 million in the bank when he started suing them, and about $3.50 by the time he'd won. So we proved in that case, and his lawyers did great work on that. Ben Corridon, the case where he got back his building in Riverside, that too used my work on the corporate structure. The other half of it was, what do all Scientologists have in common that they're suing for? And you've got a problem there, because the promises are religious promises, spiritual promises. If you read that little statement that's printed in the beginning of the books that tells us that this basically says this stuff doesn't work, so you can't sue us, but in a much lengthier way. And nowadays people sign all sorts of contracts, which I would suggest are illegal contracts, because you are signing away your civil rights, you're signing away your legal rights, and that shouldn't be permitted. But the answer I came to was that the only thing that we had in common that was not a religious claim were the claims made in Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, for the state of clear. That you have a super IQ and emotional control and all of this stuff. Hello, Nathan L. In Maine, USA. That you would, you get your asthma and your arthritis, and you wouldn't need to wear glasses anymore. That's good. Though Ron Hubbard wore them to his dying day. And so I reckon that the promise of clear and the failure to deliver on that promise was enough to bind a class together. But sadly, the steering committee of FAIR, Freedom for All in Religion, were all still practitioners of Scientology, and felt that it would denigrate Scientology to say this. Well, I don't think any of them are now. Stansfields may well not still be alive anymore. It's been a long time since I heard from them. But you have to have got it out of your head first. You have to have realized that it does not deliver what it promises. It absolutely does not deliver what it promises. And therefore, I think there is a weakness there. There are also, human trafficking, modern slavery. It would certainly be a case for SEAL members. And I think Mark and Claire Headley tried that. And the Justice Department or the FBI chickened out. But certainly being, for those people who've been moved into another country and if they've been moved to the US and got a fake green card so they can stay there. There are cases that could be put together, but it would require a very powerful and focused legal team who understood what they were taking on. So, for example, with Bent Corridon, he was initially with a large law firm, and he had a lawyer called Toby Plevin. And Toby was so devoted to the case that when her law firm said, "We don't want to do this anymore," she went independent. And they really didn't have the funds and resources. It's amazing that they got through. I think Toby ended up living in Bent's apartment because there were no wages left for anything. And I'd still like it if anybody knows Bent, if he paid me the rest of my fee from 1991. But there you go. That's a personal beef that I have. So thank you, Steph. And do we have anything else? Livestream. That doesn't sound good, does it? Thank you, Michael, for pointing that out. And hello to you in Victoria, British Columbia, in Canada. Let me go on to, and please ask me some questions. That's what we're here for. This is from Jan D, and it said, "I've wanted to know for a while, what, if any, is the pay structure of Scientology? I know Sea Org members get paid peanuts, but does David Miscavige have a fixed salary or just skim a huge chunk off the top? Similarly, are the members in charge of some groups, get a smaller slice, or are they on Sea Org wages too?" Well, my experience was that in the missions, which are theoretically slightly independent of the control of this organization, that the staff members I knew back in Birmingham Moseley, when it was still a mission and not an org, not an organization, that they basically signed on the dole and got social security money so they'd have enough to go around. Many of the people I knew had they were moonlighting, as Hubbard calls it. They had a second job, so that they could pay to be working on staff. So I don't think that's changed very much. In terms of David Miscavige's access to money, David Miscavige has complete control over the bank accounts of Scientology, just as Ron Hubbard did before him. And the reason that tax exemption was impossible before Hubbard's death was because money was inuring into his bank accounts, which is to say that it was freely flowing out of Scientology accounts into Ron Hubbard's accounts. Hubbard left $648 million, none of it from the sale of his books, his fiction, Battlefield Earth and things like that, which were probably sold at a loss, as far as I can tell from what I've learned about that. All of this money, $648 million, came from Scientology. And it is an amazing thought that the IRS, I think in the end, somebody can correct me on this, but I think they only paid $6 million as a settlement. Now, obviously, the tax on $648 million should have been a bit more than that. So Miscavige, I believe, I've been told, has what's called a living trust in Netherlands Antilles, and pretty much is a kind of, I don't like to make this invidious comparison, but he's a kind of Vladimir Putin figure, somebody who really controls everything around him. So, no, I don't think he has a fixed salary. He drinks Blue Mountain coffee made with distilled water while he's got a cigarette in one hand and his asthma aerator in another. There is nobody else has any control in Scientology. He is the dictator of Scientology. So let me see what we've got. If anything. Oh, and Mathieu Etienne Dumais, hello from Quebec in Canada. Hello, Mathieu Etienne. So, John Breen, what are your thoughts on how the internet has changed how ex-members engage and confront these groups? Do you know of the Lighthouse International group case in the UK and South African press? Okay, well, addressing the first part of that, the internet, the World Wide Web, was an absolutely transformative event. I can remember when ultra-religion Scientology went up, and what a brilliant idea. And I think it was the first message board of its type. And it allowed former members to communicate about the horrors they'd experienced without then being harassed by Scientology. When I asked Arnie Lerma to write me, a little puff piece for the new edition of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, he said, before the internet and safety in numbers, that was John Atack. And that is, there weren't many of us. It was Lawrence Wollersheim, Jerry Armstrong, Robert Vaughan Young, and his wife, then wife Stacey. There were a few people over the years who decided they were going to do something, and you got punished for it. I had 16 years solid of harassment. Once the internet was there and the ability to, because it made it difficult to trace people, there is actually probably, there might be some areas of the dark net, but probably anonymity on the internet is a fiction. But Scientology didn't have the resources to chase that many people. And I think now they just have a kind of hit list of the top 10. And I'm happy to say that I don't appear to be on it. It changed everything, and it's changed everything. We've seen the effect that it's had on the Watchtower, the Jehovah's Witnesses. That is, that it's possible now that there are probably about 15 million people who've been involved with witnesses, and about half of those have left. We're seeing the same thing with the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, that their organization is leaking because people can go and have a look for information. So when I was researching, I had to write to the Library of Congress, put in freedom of information requests for Hubbard's Navy records, his FBI records, his dad's records, Jack Parsons' FBI records, this sort of thing. Write to the Montana Historical Society, find people and talk to them. And with the help of Chris Owen in the 90s, we went through what we thought were the important documents, was the important material for people to have, including, for example, the intelligence training, the investigation full hat, the information full hat, which is now Invest or Investigation is the place that uses that pack, and it's still used. Not one word of it has been changed. It's 800 pages. It's got TR lying in it, training routine lying, how to lie to people. It's got breaking and entering on it. It's got Ron Hubbard's lecture to the investigators, and it's largely Hubbard material. 800 pages. We put all of that up on the internet. So much of the material became available at that point, and it means you can go and search and find this stuff. I mean, I'd still say that it, and this is self-promotion, that it's better to start by reading Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, because it remains the only attempt to give a history of Scientology as well as a biography showing Hubbard's deceptions, where it's the book that Russell Miller's excellent Barefaced Messiah is based upon. He had my manuscript because I couldn't find a publisher, and I've actually got via Chris Owen, I got Russell's annotated copy of the printout of the original Blue Sky, showing which bits he was going to use and which not. He was writing a biography of Hubbard. My interest was to show that Hubbard was a liar, so I touched upon aspects of his life where there were contradictions and where we found, that he has himself admitted he was not a nuclear physicist. In other places, he claims to be a nuclear physicist. But so making that material available, the problem is that people will kind of wander around in it. And because the subject is so incredibly complicated, Scientology is far more complicated than any of the other authoritarian cults. If you look at, say, transcendental meditation, they only have 2 techniques. Scientology's got 2,000. And if you get into the history, I think it's good to get the shape of it, read Blue Sky, and don't read one of the free online copies. They're all pirates. They've all stolen my material. And what's more, it's not up to date. And there are errors in the manuscripts that are online. And it will only cost you a few bucks, and I get $1 of that. So that's good. But read that and then go to the internet and this huge amount of material and, read some of the ex-member accounts. I think my favorite is Mark Headley's Blame for Good, because it's really funny in a few places. But Jefferson Hawkins' Counterfeit Dreams, or Miscavige's niece's book. There are many good books describing what a horrible experience it is for most people to be on staff in Scientology, particularly. As to where were we? Lighthouse International. No, I don't know about that. I haven't looked into it, and I will make a note of it. So that, let me get my little pad right now, so that I can look it up. Somebody in comments this week pointed out I think it's Larry Ray case at Sarah Lawrence, which I was not aware of. And, I am happy to know these things. I'm no longer focusing particularly on cult groups, but where something outrageous and extreme occurs, particularly where there are legal precedents, because we need to add those together. So, that in June 2015, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses, were fined hundreds of thousands of pounds in the English court because they had failed to tell a family that they were moving a pedophile into, that he had a record as a sex offender, and so they were held responsible for the offences he then committed. And let's say this is a group, the Jehovah's Witnesses, that actually recruit in prisons, and they will recruit child sex offenders, forgive them, and then allow them access to children. It said, and I was told this in 2015, that they have a record. I think it was Barbara Anderson that this came from. That there's a list of 23,000 sex offenders within the Jehovah's Witnesses that they won't share with legal authorities. So any important cases, please let me know. Nathan L asked me, there's one above that, get to that. From Michael Yoda. Hi, Michael, and thank you for staying with us over the years. I really appreciate it, and for commenting as you do, and telling me that I talk too much every now and then, which is absolutely true. And wow, here we are in a place where it's just me doing the talking. I am very talkative. It's a bad thing. But he says here, can you talk more about the starting of the Free Zone? I've been watching LRH lectures and Captain Bill, yikes, as well as David Mayo. The Free Zone is specifically Captain Bill Robertson. Captain Bill was an amazing character, and character's the only word for him. I came to know him quite well because I first met him on the 18th of October 1983 when there was an event. There's that Scientology word, and it was the first time that people who were dissatisfied with Scientology had a public meeting in the UK, I believe, and about 60 people turned up to the Crown Hotel in East Grinstead, and that was the first time I met Bill. Now, the event was hosted for him. I was asked 3 days before he turned up by Bevan Priest if I would sort of be the master of ceremonies and would I like to take over as the chairman of the OT Committee UK. And I think it was because he was standing saluting me, which was weird, that I immediately took to the idea of becoming the chairman of the OT Committee UK, much good as it did me. There was a committee, I was the committee. I didn't have any. So, but I didn't know that was Bill. Bill was the chairman of the OT Committee worldwide. And he gave a presentation that night, some of which is certainly on YouTube, though it's my copyright because I had it filmed. I talked a guy out, a cameraman, the night before, and he filmed it all, did a good job of it. And then the next day he gave me the tapes and said, no, I'm going back to Scientology. So that was my first failure at actually convincing somebody that this wasn't necessarily a very good idea. Bill was, he'd been a Mississippi motorcycle cop during the civil rights movement. He was a big guy. He was taller than me. He was probably about 6'4", broad and hairy. And he rode a Harley Davidson motorbike. And he'd actually got captain's papers for a ship. So he was the captain of the Apollo, not just a captain in the Sea Hawk. He actually knew how to navigate a ship, which is a pretty complicated thing to do, I imagine. And he was just in love with Hubbard, and I mean that in all ways, and absolutely devoted to him. The free zone came about when Bill was thrown out in 1981. He was one of him and Norman Starkey. There were only two adults who were permitted to join the Commodore's messenger organization, and then he was declared suppressive, and it freaked him out. He ended up actually staying with a friend of his in Spain, and he said, "Could I have a really small room?" And Bill told me this, and he said, "Oh no, it's not small enough. Do you have a closet?" And Bill told me that he spent days just shut in a wardrobe as he came back to the world after all of these years in civilization. And while he was there, he got this idea that why the FBI, he was convinced the FBI had taken over Scientology, by the way. The reason the FBI had been able to take it over was because it had a hierarchy and a pyramid that led to a leader. And the way Scientology should be independent nodes, a bit like the way the internet, the way the World Wide Web works on the internet. So that if you take out one node, you've still got to take out all the rest. Now, this idea was not exactly novel. It had already been used by Scientology, or at that time was being used. Larry Brennan was using it in the corporate sort out. And the idea was basically to follow the model of the Catholic Church and separate every diocese. So it would be an independent organization, rather like having compartments in a ship that you can't, so if one is flooded, it doesn't take the others. But Scientology did it so that, in fact, David Miscavige, as I've just said a few minutes ago, had complete control. Bill said, no, each organization needs to be its own agency. And that model has been very successful. I think the Free Zone is probably bigger than the Mother Cult. The Mother Cult's down to about 25,000 members of the fee-paying members of the International Association of Scientologists. It is that small. We have seen internal figures. It's not just rumor. I think the Free Zone is certainly twice that size. But we've seen incredible eccentricity there. Bill himself remade the Scientology bridge and did all of the OT levels so that there'd be every aspect of the organization board would be represented. So he multiplied the OT levels. As far as I remember, he didn't live to the age of 60 because he had a tumor in his throat, and I was told he refused to have a tracheotomy. He was going to audit it off, and he died. And that's how it came about. He called it Ronsorg as well as the Free Zone. The Free Zone seems to have been adopted by most of the independents without necessarily, them being followers of Captain Bill. Oh. Right, let me put my specs back on. And Was from Nathan L. Was David Miscavige ever employed outside of Scientology? No. God, that was a short answer. He was his dad, and there's an interview. I did one interview with his dad, who I thought was just the most charming human being. How he had a son like that, I don't know. I've met years ago when I was first in Scientology. I met David's older brother Ronnie, and he was a charming and intelligent man. But no, I think he was 13 when they took him to St. Hill and he started auditing people. He was 17 when he went to work for Ron Hubbard at La Quinta on the tech films, which a great deal of money was poured into, and none of which are available anymore, which is a little bit strange, but they were dreadful ones I saw. Ghosty McGhostface. This is a Boaty McBoatface fan, I think, or Sir David Attenborough, as we now call the ship. Have you got any thoughts on Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter and his so-called free speech agenda? Yeah, isn't it terrifying that a man who evidently is not neurotypical, let's say that, who has a very odd mind and very bad manners, isn't it strange that he would decide that he's going to advocate free speech? Because free speech, we have this problem, don't we, which is hate speech. And we do know that it's possible to incite people to do terribly destructive things. Seeing the rise of QAnon, which is utterly bizarre from my perspective. What is Elon Musk going to do here? I think it's probably a bad thing, but I think maybe Twitter will collapse because remember MySpace, that once you take a wrong turn, you can very much lose your followers. Twitter could collapse overnight. So who knows? Yeah, Michael Yoder, you just watched his East Grinstead talk yesterday. Yeah, it was. When David Gaiman wouldn't stop talking, he went on the stage and went, "I have been with Ron for more than many centuries." And a friend of mine who sat in the front row said she had a headache for a week because he shouted so loud. But amusing times. I was a very young man back then. Well, you want Spike? Ghosty McGhostface wants Spike's views on Elizabeth Moss. Well, I'll tell you my views, which is, how is it that so many, Nancy Cartwright or Isaac Hayes, they are speaking like Tom Cruise in many movies. Look at him in Magnolia, brilliant film. How is it that they manage as actors to play these characters without realizing that they're actually involved in an organization which is cultic, so I don't know what Spike's views are. She'll tell you. Yes, Michael Yoder. Bill had a lot of weird UFO borderline QAnon ideas. He most certainly did. He predicted that in 1986 the world economy would collapse and that gold would soar in price, that the 200,000 Marcabians and I'm not kidding, the 200,000 Marcabians who were already in Switzerland as part of the Transcendental Meditation Organization would use the Freemasons to take the world over. So that was 1986. And I don't think it happened, maybe in a parallel universe. John Breen, who in your opinion is the nastiest in OSA? Peter Mansell, who appeared on Ireland's Late Show in 1995 with ex-member Mary Johnston, seems very nasty. The way he shouts down Mike Gard is nasty. Yeah, that is, well, hard to say. The people I encountered who seemed the most dangerous were Miles Mellor and Peter Stumkey. But I didn't meet Mo Budlong, who was running it all. I also encountered, what was his name? Brian, it'll come back to me. Brian Rubinek. And Brian I interviewed him for 11 hours, and he was working for Miscavige. This was in '86 when I was first in the States. And he gave me this 3 evenings of interviews to try and convince me that Ron Hubbard knew nothing about the break-ins in Washington. I have to say, firstly, if he had such wonderful operating latent powers, how on earth did Hubbard not know about what the Guardian's office were doing? And on the other hand, I talked with somebody who was sending the telex as we're going through, and that half of Hubbard's traffic was directly into branch 1. So I think he did know. Who's the nastiest now? I don't know, because thankfully this is not the center of my life anymore. I talk about Scientology, but I don't really keep up with it. It seems to breed nastiness being in the Office of Special Affairs. What have we got? Yeah, Spike makes this comment that Elizabeth Moss is so well treated within the bubble of public Scientology. And that is a huge difference, the treatment that the organization members receive, that staff receive. And of course, they're not allowed to talk about, because that would bring Scientology into ill repute, and that's a high crime. So they'd be thrown out, and they know they will. In the 9 years I was involved, nobody told me any of the horror stories about the Rehabilitation Project Force, or the perpetual rice and beans diets, or the 90-hour week, or not being allowed to see their children, or the mistreatment of their children. Nobody in 9 years said that. And celebrities are in this different place. And of course, the whole idea of the Celebrity Centre was to give them this different treatment. And you've got Hubbard's policy that anybody that blows off a celebrity, gets a celebrity leave, is in big trouble. They will be declared suppressive. And my own experience was something like this. Although I was a starving artist, I was an artist. And so I was treated as a celebrity. For the most part, I was shouted at twice in 9 years, and I shouted back. So, when I was asked in a deposition by their head of legal, Kendrick Moxon, one of the 38 unindicted co-conspirators from the Guardian's Office 11 case, when he asked me if I'd been brainwashed in Scientology, I said no. I wasn't humiliated, I wasn't abused. But in talking with hundreds of former members, that's very unusual. If you don't have money, or you aren't an artist, a celebrity, you'll likely be badly treated. Whereas Elizabeth Moss, Remini tells us that Tom Cruise has 4 Sea Org members on permanent loan to look after him and do whatever he likes, so he can continue to behave like an 8-year-old all the time. She talks about him wanting to bake cookies and screaming his head off with his assistant. Oh dear. And the poor assistant had put the cookie dough out for him, but it was the wrong end of the counter. Oh. Let's see, what have we got? Yes, Neil's dad. That's right, David Gaiman, Neil Gaiman's dad. And Michael Yoder, we know about QAnon in the States, and we have our own particular Canadian version. Is there a QAnon movement in the UK? Well, the Facebook group QAnon had 3 million members by the time of the last election in 71 countries. So this is a craziness that has spread around the world. And again, as with so many groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses, the prophecy that I think the world was going to end in 1914. As is predicted by Leon Festinger in the excellent text When Prophecy Fails, those who believe, the high fervor members, will continue to believe even when the prophecies fail. And the Jehovah's Witnesses have had 20 or so predictions for the end of the world. But it's not happened. Well, parallel universe, it may have happened. So, yeah, QAnon is, it's interesting to see, that you've got the anti-vax movement within there. So when Trump started recommending vaccination, that became a little bit difficult. But how anybody can believe, how anybody can believe such nonsense, I have to stop short and say, yeah, well, I did OT3, so who am I to talk about gullibility? And from LL, were UK Scientologists treated differently to those from elsewhere, or is it the same recipe all over? I think it pretty much is the same business everywhere. People at St. Hill were treated very badly indeed. I did a long interview with a woman who grew up as a child at Stonelands, when that was the property where the Sea Org lived. And their conditions were nothing short of horrific. As she pointed out, the main thing was that they didn't have enough to eat. And children, it just wasn't enough food, so they were starving all the time. That you might have, she said at one point, there were 80 children with one adult to look after them. UK law says one adult for 3 children, unless it's a school situation. But in care of small children, children under 5, there should be only 3 children per adult. 80 children. And her brother at the age of 8 drowned on a trip to the seaside because there was inadequate supervision. He'd also been forced to wash his mouth out with washing up liquid. Now, soap is not nice to have in your mouth, but washing up liquid is a degreasant, and it is an awful thing to put into the human system. So just, yes, reading about the Scientology in Australia, in South Africa, it's largely been in the English-speaking countries. There was a where it was doing very well in Milan and in, but those days are long gone. So yeah, it does run very much as a monolith, with the same orders being distributed all over the world and the same treatment being meted out. So even something like overboarding, which I'd never heard of, 9 years of membership, and nobody had ever told me that Hubbard was having people thrown off the ship. And there are pictures of it. In Auditor number 41, there are pictures, double-page spread, with Beren Berez chucking somebody overboard and photo credit L. Ron Hubbard. So he knew it was happening. But I didn't realize that forms of overboarding were then moved into the organizations. It might be a cold shower. At St. Hill, it was being thrown in the lake. Just this way of humiliating and debasing people until they become obedient slaves. Dreadful. Sad about Neil's family. Neil Gaiman, he's a modern day genius writer. He is. I met him a couple of times back in the day when he was working for Scientology. And he was a very high-ranking Scientologist. He was a Class 8 auditor, which means he'd done OT3. And I suppose his situation is, I imagine his sisters are still involved, and so he needs to keep quiet. But he's made an incredible life for himself and become one of the most successful writers in the world. And he's a great storyteller. So, yeah. Yes, Ghostly Ghostface, all the conspiracy cocktail gets mixed up. That's what QAnon has done. It's brought together all sorts of crazy ideas. There's an excellent book called Republic of Lies, which talks about conspiracy theories. And the first quarter of the book is about the lies and deceptions of governments, which have meant that we can't really trust governments. They lie, and they keep lying. We can't, it's dangerous to trust the media. I don't quite come down to there's the mainstream media. There's a lot of competition in the media. But there is, whether it's a kind of conspiratorial direction of the media, which is what QAnon would like us to believe, or whether it's just what Chomsky called the propaganda effect, which is that in a particular culture, you don't talk about certain things. So while the US was training with the Green Berets at the School of the Americas in Virginia, were training the Contrarrevolution guerrillas to rape nuns and castrate men, to burn down schools and burn down hospitals. This is in the 1970s. While this was happening, there was no US media covering these events. Salman Rushdie's book, The Jaguar Smile, covers some of it, and eventually, in 1988, Newsweek broke a story. But I think sometimes it's just that the media is not looking in that place. So the tendency to be Eurocentric, the war in Ukraine, which is a dreadful thing, has caused an outpouring of support. The war in Syria and the wars in North Africa haven't. And we get so much less news. In 2000, when the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments was obliterated, 500 people died. I wonder how many people who are watching this have ever heard of this group. Yet it's the second largest group suicide after Jonestown, where 911, 912 people were murdered or committed suicide, largely murdered, as far as I can tell. But they were Americans, and so it gets into the media when Africans do it. So there is a bias there, which I find distressing. Here we are. Michael Yoder gives us some dates: 1914, 1925, 1951, 1971, and 1999. And as he says, now it's just soon. A version of the check is in the mail. So true. In fact, they do have a predicted date. I think it's 2033, the next one. They've moved it up a bit. And they don't publish it. So I was told that by a former member who'd been told it. Don't tell anybody, but the world's going to end any minute. And if you want to upset anybody who's in the Jehovah's Witnesses or has been in the Jehovah's Witnesses, all you have to do is look at them and say, Armageddon, and see what happens. 2032 we've got from Spike, so that's probably right. She's probably remembered better than I thought it was 2033. But and Trump himself encouraged intake of bleach into our bodies. Isn't it a remarkable situation when people of diminished intellect manage to gather around them a massive volume of followers? Stalin was a very clever man, but Hitler, there doesn't seem to have been a lot going on there, except that he was very good at shouting and making gestures. So all they're selling is certainty. And there are a few books I think everybody should read. Robert A. Burton. I even wrote to him and said, thank you so much. On Being Certain. This is a wonderful book because we live our lives pretending that we have wisdom, learning, knowledge. Those are not, I don't claim any of those things. I have information. And believing things to be knowledge. Tell the same story every time about this one. I was 17 years old, spent 2 hours talking with a born-again Christian because I wasn't clever enough to say, I've got things to do. And after 2 hours, he retreated, imagine it. And as he retreated, facing me as he went, just in case I jumped on his back and ripped his head off. I don't know what he was thinking. Perfectly amicable conversation. He said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. Now, I think it is important for us to separate out what is and isn't true. And what's true about Donald Trump is that he is a man who has cheated, lied, and conned people all his life. His dad was in with the mafia. The Commodore Hotel, his first project, the tax relief he got he got tax relief for the poor on a building for the rich, which was because the mayor was a little bit corrupt, and then he won the lawsuit to maintain these tax benefits. Then he sets up 3 casinos in Atlantic City, and you're going, you're in competition with yourself. You've got 3 casinos. The art of the deal. He didn't even write it. Tony Schwartz wrote it. Incredible that such a man should develop such a following and such fervor in that following. People who, critical thinking, rational thinking is what we do when we're not upset. As soon as somebody starts attacking you in a conversation, as soon as somebody raises their voice at you, it's no longer a discussion. It's an argument, and that's my way of telling how involved somebody is with their beliefs. And if somebody, a couple of friends are theologians, and I'm an agnostic, and I can sit and talk with them about the Bible till the cows come home, no problem, because they don't get upset about it. I have other Christian friends, naming no names, who, when I tried to embark on such a conversation, said that we shouldn't. I think you don't contend with Scripture or something like that, so you don't have to talk about it. Michael Yoda, what's your interview with Andrew Gold? What was your experience with him? He's done several videos on the Church Scientology. I liked him very much, and I thought his documentary on BBC Three, TV documentary about the Argentinian exorcist, was a really fine piece of work. And I liked talking with him, but I watched that afterwards and was also impressed by. He speaks fluent Spanish. I mean, really fluent Spanish. Very jealous. I'm still working on fluent English. So from Alal, very good to hear you are making progress in introducing education surrounding coercion within schools. I enjoyed the Eton podcast. How to get this into mainstream schools? Well, in the UK, we have, in our national curriculum, every school has to deliver an education in personal, social, health, and economic well-being. The government mandates that there will be no set curriculum, so each school has to work it out for itself. So if somebody like me, who's willing to work for nothing, comes along and manages to put together a few £100 to get the people I need, and I do have the people I need, I'm still looking for a cartoonist, actually, because found a fantastic cartoonist, but unfortunately she wanted full professional rates, and full American professional rates is beyond my capacity of fundraising. As I say, I work for free for some unknown reason. So what we're doing, we've been working on a set of 12 lessons. They'll be offered for free to all 4,000 schools in the United Kingdom. And as schools often sort of palm this off on the physical education teacher, because the poor person's got to put this together. So the thought was, and I've been with this for years. In 2014, we started talking about what became the Open Minds Foundation. Steve Hassan, Dick Kelly, and I started that. It started up. I wrote something like 180 content pieces. Spike wrote quite a lot for it too. And once that was set up and done, we kind of went, we want to do this directly. We want to go, which is why we started the YouTube channel. And the thought was to bring the basics of coercion and coercive control. And my thought is, it can take years to recover from an experience of authoritarian abuse. In fact, if you're not helped, I think many people don't recover. They live within the belief system that they think they've left. It's not been extricated, and it's not difficult to extricate. That's the thing that really annoys me. If I sit down with somebody for a day, they then have the process started to actually work over it over the weeks and months to come away from it. I've been thankfully very successful in doing that in the last 38 years now. But it's not something I really do anymore, because I want something, rather than getting into the recovery, why not the prevention? Why not persuading 13-year-olds, showing them the characteristics of a human predator, the methods that are used by a human predator, how to spot fake news, lies, propaganda, how to see that something is advertising. Robert J. Lifton's 8 Deadly Sins of Thought Reform, Robert Cialdini's 7 Points of Influence. These are things that every child should know. And so I went to Eton and gave the talk about Scientology, which was fun. It was an incredible, real, true peak experience. I'm in a room where there's a bust of Shelley, the poet, looking at me, and among the possibly thousands of graffitied names, there is Shelley. And I'm in the room where that's happening, and thinking later, this is where George Orwell and Aldous Huxley studied, who wrote the 2 great warnings about where our society might go if we weren't careful, and we haven't been careful. I think the Brave New World model, as Huxley pointed out in Brave New World Revisited, an excellent book, that is what's really happening. It's getting people tranquilized enough so that they're inactive, and keeping them, wanting to buy a new dress or new shoes or whatever, new car, instead of paying attention and being responsible about the environment. And but it was an amazing thing to be there in this room where this had happened. I've now proposed to them that I want to go back and talk about fake news, because it's their journalism society that I spoke to, and I'm waiting to hear back. But we are very gradually preparing these lessons. We have funding for the first 2, so if anybody's got any money out there, that would always be useful. Or if anybody knows a brilliant cartoonist, that would also be useful, especially one who works on the cheap. So the thought is that we can get this to 11 to 13-year-olds in a single bag, so that from then on, schools will be able to teach this material, which, I'm working with my fiance, who's a trained teacher and has taught personal, social health and economic education. So she'll put lesson plans together. The thing is to get the kids to talk about it, to get it into their heads. I mean, just getting over to people, while I was researching this, I got into advertising and the dangers of advertising, and finding out how much celebrities are paid to endorse a product. So Diet Coke paid Taylor Swift $26 million to be able to use her name for 1 year. And I don't blame her for wanting the money, but it says something about this product which has absolutely no benefits. It was Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola are both fraudulent inventions invented by druggists in the 19th century. And if you look to their original advertising, which we will be using in the lesson, Coca-Cola was advertised as a brain tonic because it had coca in it. It was made with cocaine leaves in it, leaves that cocaine is extracted from. So it was a brain tonic. They took that out in 1903. And Pepsi Cola is called Pepsi Cola because it's meant to cure dyspepsia or indigestion. They're just sugar drinks that have phenylalanine in, which some people respond to badly, and have created an almost religious following. So what do we got? So yeah, that needs to happen, but yeah, we really could do with some funding. And anybody who wants to contact me through Spike, who has contacts or funding, that would be great. John Breen. John, what's your opinion on the UK not having a safe place for ex-members of groups to go to talk about their experiences, unlike, say, Ireland? There are a couple of places. Alex Stein runs something in London. and she's brilliant. She is a truly remarkable person, and A Terror, Love and Brainwashing is an excellent book. So they have group meetings where people from any groups. You also have Hope Valley Counselling, which has retreats. That's up near Sheffield, and that's Dr. Gilly Jenkinson. I should say Alex Stein also has a doctorate as a doctor. So there is something, but there should be something publicly funded. There should be, something rather more, I think, than we have. Wellspring was perhaps the model for it. Yeah, education this is from Nathan L. Good point. Education, broadly speaking, to foster common sense and good citizenship, loses its clout when people can find whatever gurus they want online. This is the big danger. Just a week ago, had a chapter with Steve Hassan, published in an Oxford University Press book on lone actor terrorism. And our chapter was to say, it's possible now to recruit people and they'll go out and be lone actors, leaderless resistance, as it's called in the trade. And this new provision there, Stefan Molyneux was the first of them, but we've got Jordan Peterson out there, who, I'm going to say this publicly, is a half-wit, but I've said it. And I'd love it to have a conversation with him and show him that we don't actually have a lobster in our head, and not telling lies is not one of the 12 rules of living. Anne Frank and many others would have been killed if people hadn't lied to the Gestapo. So we have to show people how to assess information, and that can be done. Facebook and Google haven't made much of a job of undoing fake news, but it can be done. And there are certain really obvious things which will go into the lesson that we're designing. Let me just scroll up a little bit. And Ghostface says YouTube still has potential to educate as well as indoctrinate. And Nathan L says, yes, true. And it is true that that's the whole business with the internet. I just finished reading Elliot Higgins' book, We Are Bellingcat. And it's really made me feel hopeful that here we are, and there's the internet. And what they've done, I didn't realize that so many cases have been cracked by Bellingcat, including the allegations that the white helmets in Syria, the Red Cross, were actually spraying chemical weapons around and trying to blame the Syrian government. And they managed to prove with photographic evidence, step by step, that the Syrian government were dropping chemical weapons, no doubt. The MH17, the Indonesian plane, no, sorry, not the Indonesian plane, the MH17, the plane that went down over Ukraine, which Russia today immediately blamed on the Ukrainians, they managed to show the Buk missile launcher from the 53rd Battalion and its whole route to arrive and fire that missile. And they were able to name the crew. They got into the GRU, which is Russia's equivalent of the CIA or the UK's MI6, the External Intelligence Agency. And they found out that this guy had his car registered to the headquarters of the GRU. So they went the other way and they found, I think it was 500 GRU agents just by finding what cars were registered to that address. Now, MI6 and the CIA hadn't managed to do this, and yet they're being paid enormous amounts of money. But we can't trust government, so we can't trust intelligence agencies. Our intelligence agencies, they lie to us. Was it the big scandal in MI5, Peter Wright's book, which Margaret Thatcher tried to stop, Spycatcher, because he said, oh, well, MI5 were actually trying to topple the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, by making up a story that he was a Russian agent. Your own intelligence agency is doing that. And I think the US having come to have 17 intelligence agencies. So with Bellingcat, the internet becomes this really potent source. And because they're a charity, their funds are open for view, they're registered in Holland, and they give the sources for everything that they're saying, and they encourage other people, and thousands of people are now contributing to Bellingcat. That sort of initiative, which leads to much better journalism than our newspapers and TV programs do. I think only the New York Times now has a proper investigative team. I think the Boston Globe Spotlight team has been disbanded. And it's more than 20 years ago, I was talking to a journalist here who said, we get 3 days on a story. So you don't get in-depth stuff, and you get the possible interference of Rupert Murdoch or the Maxwell family or whoever. So this idea of the internet can be a tremendous blessing, but it also gives us QAnon and so much else. And allow conversation around those indoctrinations is worthwhile too. Educational in itself. That is so true. That I think the thing that concerns me the most is that the methods of manipulation and deception are so easy. Once you've seen how it's done, how somebody pulls the wool over somebody else's eyes. And we're not teaching kids that, and we're not teaching them about relationship. We're not teaching them basic household skills, and whether they know which way the Nile River flows or what have you in their geography, or what year Queen Elizabeth I came to the throne, or can quote the 7 passages from Mac. We really are in a bad place educationally. And there I absolutely recommend Sir Ken Robinson's books, Creative Schools and the Elements. Because there is tremendous hope right now. Most of the people I see, most of the people I deal with, are cheerful enough in their little world, their bubble of doing what they do. The people who particularly work with former cult members, for example. But they have a despair about the future of humanity. I don't think it's time for that yet. I think it's time to pull our socks up and do something. And a lot of that is changing the educational system so that rather than it being, universal education started in Austria in the 1760s, that collapsed. The longest running system is the German system, which started in Prussia in 1806, I believe, and was Wilhelm von Humboldt, who was the brother of the genius Alexander von Humboldt, who is the guy who should be getting all the praise that Darwin gets because he was Darwin's guru. But nonetheless, his brother Wilhelm started universal schooling. And the reason was the Prussians had been defeated at the Battle of Jena by Napoleon, and they wanted better soldiers. So that was what happened there. In this country in the 1870s, it happened because they wanted women to be able to work in factories, so the children needed somewhere to be. In the US, shortly after that, it started to homogenize the population. And look at it, Italian Americans, Jewish Americans, African Americans, Chinese Americans. It hasn't happened. You don't have a homogenized population. What's more, literacy rates dropped in Massachusetts, where the system they had in place was more effective. I think they had 98% literacy in the 1880s there. It's never gone back to that. So, looking at why we educate, and that we should be educating children to be pro-social, to be looking to do something in society that's positive. And we should be doing something to help those who are antisocial, if they can be helped, and something to restrain them from doing harm if they can't be helped, rather than burning them as witches, which is the old-fashioned way of doing it. And of course, it's the people who are burning them that are actually the antisocial ones. So looks down, looks down, looks down. Yeah, and Spike wants us to know about R11's, what's it called? This Perfect Day, which she recommended to me some time ago. It's an excellent book. I think Huxley goes a little further because he has so many clever ideas. It's the first time that the term cloning was used. So, 1932, Brave New World. And his brother Julian Huxley, who also went to Eton, was the great biologist of the period, and so introduced him to the notion of cloning. And so the Bokanovsky clone was born. But I think Prozac has become our soma, that so many people are on this stuff and not really feeling the highs and lows of their experience, which is probably not a good thing as a long-term solution, as a short-term way. Or if indeed you have endogenous depression, then it's a different matter. But about 80% of people who are taking SSRIs have a reactive depression. They're unhappy. They're not actually depressed. So it should be a very short period of time. Blah, 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 blah. Mervyn Peake's Gorman Gas Dystopia. Yeah, it's a dystopia. I think and brilliant. Peake was a genius. But I think there's something about 1984 and Brave New World that is talking not about a fantasy dystopia. That 1984 is about the Soviet Union quite directly. People falling down the memory hole and being scratched out of existence. Brave New World is about, in Ira Levin's book, about creating a world where people don't realize they're being controlled and deceived at every step. Everything looks so nice and happy. You can go, there are John Wyndham's Consider Her Ways. I was a huge John Wyndham fan when I was in my early 20s. Brilliant writer. And he posits a society in the future where there are no more men, because men aren't necessary, and you have test tube babies, and so that we could go back to Thomas More's Utopia, which of course means no such place, but it's given us this idea of a perfect place. H.G. Wells, E.M. Forster, The Machine Stops. There are a lot of them, but I think those two are the kind of essential reading about what is going wrong in human society. And because, again, Huxley wrote Island, which I think is, of his 11 novels, is the worst. But he was a proto-hippie by then, and had been conned into the Bates Eye system and things like this. This Perfect Day. Well, okay, Spike, she's disagreeing with me. How dare you? I'll sack you if you do that. And you won't be paid. Oh, you're not being paid anyway. So, oh, hello. Great. Be in touch. Love to hear from you. Oh, Fahrenheit 451. Yeah, absolutely. Ray Bradbury. Absolutely brilliant. And the film of it. So it's not to say that there aren't other people who've done wonderful things in here. It's just, I think there's a complete vision of society in 1984 and Brave New World. And Brave New World Revisited, for anybody that wants to get into it deeply, really discusses the question. Huxley's a fascinating man, an absolutely brilliant human being. Went a bit dippy at the end of his life. I think his last words were LSD, try some. There you go, famous last words. And then, of course, Eric Blair, George Orwell had a distinctly bad last couple of years where he basically was, while writing 1984, he was informing on his own friends. He was saying Stephen Spender is gay to MI5. So things went a bit wrong there, but he was very, very ill indeed and would not stop smoking or drinking for that matter. Oh, well, goodbye, Michael. Thank you very much. Absolutely fabulous. Thank you. Yes, absolutely fabulous. One of the great comedies, no doubt. Um, Yeah, Bellingcat Resources. You've written Bellingcar. The R and the T are next to each other. And Bellingcat Resources are great. They are. And Bellingcat the second has a. Yeah, that's right. They're Bellingcat. The other great thing is they're going around the world and teaching in universities, teaching people how to do the depth of research that they do, and some of their geolocation and their. One of the things with the MH17 and finding the book missile launcher was that Eastern Europe, there's this real fad for having a dash cam and sending your footage all up. So there are thousands and thousands of these things up there. And you can search and find your way through and reconstruct events. Quite remarkable. Excuse me. From John Breen. John, have you ever heard of Tony Quinn? Heard of Anthony Quinn, the Zorba the Greek, and La Strada by Fellini. Follower of his Educo group found oil. It's claimed 1% of the revenue of oil fields in Belize is used up to market his Enlightenment seminars. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, Scientology managed to get, I think it was the Colombian Army were using Scientology, and it was very nearly the case that the US Army adopted transcendental meditation until it was proved that it's a religious practice. They have a puja, a ceremony, and they teach you a mantra, which is the name of a deity or demon. But a big secret, you're not meant to know that. I was shocked. I had a call from, it's about 30 years ago. This guy was working, I think it was Lloyd's Bank, and he said he was an ex-Scientologist. And he was a bit frightened because this group had come in and they were teaching Scientology training routines, and they were called exegesis. So groups like that, like Earhart Seminar Training, the Forum, Landmark Trust, whatever name those techniques, LifeSpring's another one. They are penetrating business and government and teaching all sorts of things, which are actually neurolinguistic programming and its derivatives that are actually methods of control. They're not ways of helping people to become more competent. You have like team building exercises, which make you more susceptible to control. So I'd be interested to know more about that. Educo. I mean, the other end, we've got all of the plutocrats, the Jeff Bezos and George Soros and Bill Gates, who have far too much power and influence in the world, and that might be considered authoritarians in their own sense. Stop Propaganda. What a great name. I'm always surprised whenever I poke around the topic of corrosive, leadless groups online, like the Order of Nine Angles, atrocious people. Yes, and it's a new thing. I mean, I wrote with Steve, we wrote about Dylan Roof and Elliot Rodger, who killed people. And they appear to have been radicalized, let's use that word, online. They didn't join a group, although Elliot Rodger was an involuntary celibate, an incel. He wasn't part of a group. We go back to, I've just done an interview with Calvin Pierce, which was incredible, and we'll put it up soon. In fact, Patreon people will have it sooner. And he was the son of William Pierce, who took over the American Nazi Party and lived brutally. And he, by writing the Turner Diaries, which has sold about 500,000 copies, it is arrant nonsense, hateful arrant nonsense, that he managed, therefore, to get to Timothy McVeigh. And McVeigh, of course, before 9/11, I believe the Oklahoma City bombing was the worst terrorist event in the United States. And the United States has about 20 terrorist events a week. We don't necessarily hear about it, but I was quite surprised when I found out how many bombings there are on a routine basis in the United States. But McVeigh had read the Turner Diaries, which is a fiction about, white power and the race war. And that led him to perform this monstrous thing, leaderless resistance, not part of a group. So, yeah, the internet, Elon Musk, coming back to the earlier question about Twitter, if it is going to be a hate place, then without moderation, then I hope that he will fall foul of the upcoming legislation in the UK, which will make you responsible as a platform for what is promoted. Just as a publisher is responsible for the content of the book as much as the author, that responsibility has to be there. And I do understand, I think you want private, if you want to do despicable, say rotten, nasty, despicable things, probably want a private place to do it rather than Twitter. But we've got 4chan and is it 8kun now rather than Chan, where which birthed QAnon. So, but a public forum where people can say what the hell they like, post images, whatever they like. No, that is not a good thing. The Order of Nine Angles. Nicholas Hall, thank you. My question is about Steve Fishman, the Scientologist. There are 4 hours of him on YouTube talking about Scientology. He released the OT materials, I believe. What on earth happened to him? Yeah, Fishman released an account that proved to be true of the first bulletin on the OT8 course. The other OT levels were released along the way before Fishman came along. But he wrote a manuscript called Lonesome Squirrel, which is freakishly bizarre. And, he talks about his wife setting an alarm for 5 minutes when they have sex. And that's how long he's got, and how he's got to keep his genitalia shaved and stuff. I believe that if you go to the underground bunker and search for Fishman, you'll find that Tony Ortega did a very thorough job on showing that Fishman is fundamentally a con man. But we didn't really get to the bottom of how he had acquired what we thought was ridiculous material about Hubbard claiming to be Lucifer, the Antichrist, and accusing Jesus of being a lover of young boys and men. I think that's the phrase that eventually came out in that bulletin. So, yeah, Steve Fishman. Impossible to tell what is and isn't true. There was some scam going on behind that, but I think Tony's done a good job on that. Ghostface, do you have any knowledge of Steiner schools? Oddly enough, I do. Michael Hall schools and the Tobias Art Academy, because East Grinstead happens to be 5 miles away from the headquarters of the Anthroposophists. So I knew a few anthroposophists. One of my friends was a bookseller who was an anthroposophist, lovely man. And they're pretty weird. They believe some strange things. Steiner himself was extraordinarily weird. He was a racist. And his system is an offshoot of the Golden Dawn and the magical groups that Ron Hubbard would become involved with. The Tobias Art thing, you can always tell when somebody's been trained there because they use the Goethe color system, which is unique to Goethe. Nobody else agrees with it. And shapes and forms that they've been taught. It's got a cloned art form. It's very strange. But I also know 3 people who went to Steiner schools, and they all said it was dreadful. It's interesting that in Silicon Valley now we're hearing about people being sent to Steiner schools so they don't have computers because their parents want to keep them away from computers. Well, and the Waldorf schools as well, all that. So I don't recommend them. We have a couple of things going on. Yeah, Anthony Burgess, yes, always worth looking at, and of course with Clockwork Orange, as well as 1985, he had a vision of a dystopian society, which rings frighteningly true in some ways. A friend of mine about 10 years ago, he was walking down the street and a van drove up alongside him, and a bunch of young men jumped out and beat him up, and then jumped back in the van and drove off. And it was reminiscent of Clockwork Orange. Yeah. Oh, well, Asex222, I am really sorry. And so is Spike, that you weren't notified. We're trying to do this about once a month. John Bream, what do you think would be the psychiatric diagnosis of Hubbard? I got very involved with this. Back in the 80s, and I talked with Frank Sarge Kabodi, who was a Scientology, he's a psychiatrist, research psychiatrist, Stanford, did his master's at Cambridge, and then did his doctoral, medical doctorate at Stanford. And I think it was 14 years working as a psychiatrist. Then his childhood friend, Gary French, introduced him to Scientology. And I think he'd been in that for another 14 years. It's a while back. My numbers could be wrong. And then he left and founded what would become the Advanced Ability Center, Palo Alto, and which then became the Institute for Research into Metapsychology, I think it was. I gave them the name Metapsychology. It was at Sarge's house, and he got a complete set of Freud, which is quite a lot. And I just pulled one volume down, and there was this word metapsychology, and he was looking for a name, and I said, there you go. But he was a very knowledgeable, very highly trained psychiatrist, and said, and what would your diagnosis be of Hubbard? And he said, he was crazy. And that's as much I got from him. But I also talked to Jolly West, and there's quite a lot of conspiracy material surrounding poor Jolly on the internet as well. And no, he wasn't involved in Waco because I was with him that week. So, and he was trying to tell the FBI to stop doing the stupid stuff they were doing. That was his whole involvement. That's just one of the stories that's told about Jolly. I found him incredibly intelligent, compassionate, decent, and helpful in the last few years of his life when I knew him. But he opened it out a little bit more, and since then I've thought about it a great deal. Hubbard's diagnosis, I am convinced that Yuval Laor was right when he said that Hubbard had temporal lobe epilepsy. When Yuval sat me down in June 2015 at Toronto and produced the Bear Fideo list of the 18 traits for TLE, 17 of them I ticked immediately. And Yuval did a show with Chris Shelton, and I don't think they gave strong examples of the traits. I found the 18th trait took me half an hour to think of. But so, for example, one of the traits is hypergraphia, which is you can't stop writing. And Hubbard is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's most prolific writer. So that one's undeniable. But they also, the sense of self can be quite different. It used to be called Dostoevsky syndrome because of Dostoevsky. And they'll have transcendent experiences. They have a sense of superiority in his case. The problem is that there's a lot more going on. It's also quite right to call Hubbard a malignant narcissist. He fits all of the characteristics. That puts him into the realm of the antisocial personality, the sociopath, the psychopath. But talking with people who were close to him, so for example, Barbara Cloden, who was his girlfriend, who he was living with as he was abandoning his second wife, Sarah. In LA, he was living with Barbara Cloden. She went on to become a psychologist. And she said he would have these terrible fits of depression. Sarah, the second wife, said the same thing. He would have these morose periods. There's a letter, 1947, to the Veterans Administration where he's complaining that he can't get out of these dreadful moods. And if you then look to what Jim Dinkelsey said about when he was looking after Hubbard in Queens, New York, 72, 73, that he'd have these moods. And then Sarge Fouth at the end, Serge Fouth at the end of his life is saying, Hubbard said he'd failed. I think this is a sign of bipolar, very possibly. But I'm very hesitant. I'm not qualified to diagnose, and I'm very hesitant about any diagnosis because I think most conditions exist on a spectrum. And it would be better to look at the symptoms rather than saying he's got these 7 symptoms. Therefore, if you've got 7 out of 19 of these symptoms, you're classified as this. Because I think it's better to treat somebody for what's actually wrong with them. And in Hubbard's case, he was narcissistic, he was bipolar, he was paranoid. It's funny when I started reading Freud to find out what Hubbard had taken from Freud, because he did early on claim he was taking Freud. The first impression I got was of this grandiose, paranoid human being. And, so Hubbard has all of those things going on. And he was crazy. And he was a pathological liar. I found it very interesting as I researched his biography to find that he'd give different details for the same story. So, one day he'd wrestled a Kodiak bear, another day he'd wrestled a polar bear. And I wouldn't recommend trying either of those things with children at home. Where are we now? I would love for you to make a video on anthroposophy. I'd have to know a lot more about it. I've been asked to, it is pretty weird. I've been asked to do a piece about Gurdjieff, and I don't know enough about Gurdjieff to say anything. So I went to Christian Sherko and to Joe Zimhart, and I said, would the pair of you get together and do this? And they haven't done it. Just lazy. Because, they're both very wide-ranging in their expertise. So anthroposophy is not impossible. We might get to that. Yeah. Asex222, what's happening with your book on the Hitler and the high-level occultist Nazi officials' relation to theosophy? You have been paying attention, haven't you? It drives me crazy how few people know Hitler literally believed in magic. Yeah, I mean, where's it gone? There are certainly Nicholas Goodrick Clarke wrote 2 excellent books, one about the Nazis and their magical stuff, and another about the neo-Nazis and the way that so-called identity Christians form one flank of neo-Nazis who they call blacks mud people. So much for evolution. And the other flank have some crazy modern invented version of Viking religion. But yes, I put that project aside. The project was actually about belief, and it stems from Voltaire's statement: people who believe absurdities will commit atrocities. And I got bogged down. I spent 5 months reading, and because I was writing a book proposal, I didn't read in depth, which is what I would normally do. Well, I didn't read in the depth that I would normally do. I mean, I read 3 books about Nazism and neo-Nazis, so it wasn't just looking at Wikipedia. But I didn't feel confident with the subject, and I found some incredible things, which I'm keeping close to my chest, which at some point I will probably get to. But my passion at the moment is to do a curriculum for schools, which will hopefully then go around the world, and then I can say I can now paint pictures, write more novels, record some music with my kids, and put out another volume of poetry, maybe, who knows. So it's not the focus of my attention at the moment, but I keep reading, and things will leak out either in YouTube videos, or I'll probably start writing some things to put on the new website that we're working on, and get a little bit into that. But the story is basically that, yes, the Munich set that gave birth to the Nazis, many of them were deep believers in magic. Hitler himself, there's a more recent book which says that he had somebody's found a copy of a magic book that he had and annotated. But there isn't a lot of evidence connecting Hitler to magical belief. But Rudolf Hess, the deputy leader of the Nazi Party, Hans Frank, the Commissar of Poland, Himmler, the founder and head of the SS, the Gestapo, and the Minister of the Interior, they all believed wacko nonsense. The strangest bit of which to me is, Madame Blavatsky, who was exposed in her own lifetime by the British Psychical Research Society, who really were invested in, they wanted things to be true, but they wanted to check them scientifically. And she was about the first person of many mediums who were exposed by them, the charlatans. She was one of the first people to be exposed, and it was found how she was doing various tricks. But she came up with this idea of Atlantis and Lemuria, and that the Atlanteans were the Aryans, and they had electron powers. That was the term added in, I think, by Guido von List, who's one of the first Aryan race theorists around about 1900. Max Planck was talking about electrons, and that sounded really good. So they had these superpowers, which Himmler then tried to breed back into the people that have superpowers. So should we be worried about people with crazy ideas getting power? Yes, we should. Put the specs back on. It's just, we're going a little bit over time here. But let's, I'll keep going a bit further. Freud was well into cocaine, Ghosty McGhostface. Yes, as Robin Williams said, he took enough cocaine to kill a small horse, as did Robin Williams. Uber Coca on cocaine was one of his first papers, and he claimed to have cured morphine addiction by using cocaine. But the guy who was actually one of the 2 people, along with Breuer, who'd funded Freud for years because he wasn't earning any money, he was a famous surgeon who'd cut himself and things had gone badly wrong, and he was using morphine to deal with pain. 2 weeks after giving him cocaine, Freud published a paper saying, I've cured morphine addiction, and the guy spent the next 7 years addicted to cocaine and morphine. Hitler was also a cocaine addict and an amphetamine addict. He used the amphetamine called Pervitin. Though he was a vegetarian and he didn't drink. John Breen, do you have any views on Eileen Barker and her influence on policies in the UK in relation to extremism and programs like Prevent in the UK and its failings in protecting the public from terrorism? Well, I think Eileen got in with a bad crowd. I'm about to do a piece with Jeffrey Augustin, who's been researching Massimo Introvini and the organisation Cesno. That's an Italian C, Cesno. And a group of them, Gordon Melton, James Lewis, Frank Flynn, who basically have become pro-cult apologists. With Eileen Barker, it was that she was hoodwinked by the Moonies when Steve Hassan tried to tell her later, look, before you came to do participant observation with us, we were trained on how to treat you. So she didn't get a real thing. She keeps coming forward with this statement that only 11% of people stayed after the indoctrination, 3-day indoctrination program. That's not a good thing if 11% of people their lives are ruined. It's a saying it's in the minority doesn't help. That statistic has been extended. I wrote a critique of a paper by Benjamin Zeller, which was attacking Steve Hassan, which is on Steve's site and Daniel Ehrlich's site. And there is this generalization. You see, it only affects 11% of people. And I pointed out that Eileen had also said you cannot generalize about these groups. So her work is relevant to the specific part of the Moonies that she worked with at that time. It certainly isn't relevant to the many other authoritarian groups out here. So I think her work is dodgy. When her husband said that she was always different when she came back from the Mooney meetings, she went to at least 14 paid holiday conferences with the Moonies. She admitted that to Parliament. That her husband said she was changed, and she chose to make that comment public and say, no, I'm not. So as to the effect that she might have had on the Prevent program, I don't know. I think that Mark Sageman and Scott Atran's influence in putting forward the idea that there is no way of manipulating people, there is no way of, they call it the bunch of guys hypothesis, where some Muslims sit down, they have pizza, the next day they play soccer, the day after they strap on suicide belts. They really do call it the bunch of guys hypothesis. They've advised the French, American, and UK governments on terrorism, and really means they haven't taught anything. Before 9/11, I was reading about terrorism and working on radicalization, and I've never been able to, get any. I've got people to listen, but not to do anything. I've spoken at two Radicalization Awareness Network conferences, one of which Exit, the counter-extremist group, was there. I did a Bordeaux conference where Exit were there. And I've spoken with Prevent, and Prevent, in fact, offered me a job de-radicalizing people. And I'm sort of going, well, if you want me to teach people how to de-radicalize, yeah, but do I want to spend my daily life talking to 15-year-olds about, what Allah does or doesn't mean? It's not the life for me. I want to reach a lot of people. So I don't know whether Eileen has had an effect, but I do know the group of sociologists that she belongs to have most certainly had an effect. If we viewed ISIS, Al-Qaeda as authoritarian cult groups, and in my book, Opening Our Minds, that's what I'm talking about, that authoritarianism goes through all parts of society, and any group that is run in an authoritarian and bullying way we should be careful of. And you can most certainly help people to not be influenced by teaching them how to understand information better, and talk them out of these things. So who knows, maybe one day somebody will listen. Something to do with Ashdown Forest, which of course is where Winnie the Pooh used to live. MI5, Nazis and witchcraft. I don't know. And when you work it out, let me know, by all means. Yeah, Crowley. Yeah, Crowley was probably sacrificing Eeyore or Piglet or something in Ashdown Forest on the Pooh Sticks Bridge. I think this is going to be the last one because I'm running over, and I've already admitted, as Michael Yoda said, and he's not listening anymore, that I do tend to talk a lot. It's well known. But I think this will be the last one. Nicholas Hall, I wonder what your thoughts are on the Raelians. I read 2 books on it. They're in awe in front of their leader, who admitted he made his beliefs up in the 1980s and still believe them. And that does happen. Uspensky, on his deathbed, tried to convince his followers that it had gone nowhere. This third way had not been effective. And he said, start with something simple, start with something you know. And it caused there to be one group that left, one group that said the teaching is true, and another group that tried to find something in the teaching to go forward. And the Raelians, I was on BBC Big Questions, BBC, in 2012, and the leader of the Raelians in the UK was on the benches opposite. And it was pretty random. They just divided us into 2 sets of facing benches. And he was very aggressive. He was, why did I call his group a cult? And I said, I haven't called your group a cult. Why are you so paranoid? And they've latched onto this thing about child abuse and campaigning against that. This way that groups will find a public issue. Scientology does it, and say, see what good people are. We're doing that. Their beliefs make no sense whatsoever to me. My concern is, however, for people's practices, and I've not heard anything. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I've not heard anything bad about the treatment of members in the Raelians. So, you can believe what you like, basically. So, I think, as I say, that I'm about. I think I'm about done. This has been great. It's still a weird experience sitting and talking at the screen, reading out questions, but I hope it's been engaging. I hope it's been engaging, and thank you all for your time. Thank you so much, and goodbye.